Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geostrategic Pulse. Thank you for watching or listening. China's giant ship may have just taken a major step into a new kind of maritime warfare. A Z-20 helicopter is now operating from China's massive Coast Guard vessel, Haijing 5901, and some analysts believe it could eventually play a role in hunting submarines. But here's a big question. Is China really building a new threat to U.S. submarines, or are we seeing something much less dramatic? Stay with us as we separate what we know from what China doesn't want us to know. And before we begin, like this video, share it, and subscribe for more strategic analysis. Most importantly, tell us what you think in the comments. Is this a genuine submarine hunting capability or strategic intimidation? There's no wrong answer, so make your case. Let's see what the community thinks. Because when you first read the headlines about a massive Coast Guard ship potentially hunting submarines, it sounds like a massive escalation.
It really does. I mean, it certainly grabs the attention of defense planners, right? But as is so often the case in maritime strategy, the devil is really in the technical details, or in this specific instance, the devil is in the equipment bays of that helicopter.
Okay, let's unpack this. We just asked you, the listener, if this is a genuine sub-hunter. So let's start by looking at the hard visual evidence from the latest news to find out what is actually sitting on the deck of that ship.
Right.
So in June of 2025, there was a visit by a Malaysian vessel to Sanya. And during that visit, we got visual confirmation. Sitting right there on the wide flight deck of the Haijing 5901, which, by the way, is a 165-meter-long ship.
Yeah, practically the size of a cruiser. It's massive.
Exactly. Sitting on that deck is a white Z-20 helicopter. And this isn't just, your standard Army transport chopper painted white. It features some very distinct maritime modifications.
Yeah, the visual analysis from that Sanya sighting is it's fundamental to understanding the platform's current state. If you look closely at the airframe, the tail wheels are positioned much closer to the cabin compared to the standard Army variant of the Z-20.
Oh, really? Why is that?
It's basically an engineering adjustment. It's specifically designed for rolling the aircraft around on a moving, pitching ship deck without it tipping over.
That makes sense.
Right. And you also see clear indications of an external fuel tank under the wing, extending its loiter time over the ocean.
Okay, but fast forward to the footage from July 2026, and the plot thickens considerably, because this new footage shows an electro-optical turret and a large surface search radar inside its own radome.
It does, yeah.
And because of those additions, it physically resembles the Chinese Navy's Z-20F, which genuinely is a sub-hunting helicopter.
Yeah.
So people are hyping this up as a major threat to underwater operations. But I have to push back on this a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
It has the radar and the fuel tank, so it resembles the Navy's Z-20F. But isn't this like putting a spoiler and racing stripes on a standard commuter car? I mean, it looks fast, but what's actually under the hood?
This raises an important question, and honestly, your analogy perfectly captures the current strategic reality. We must strictly separate surface surveillance from anti-submarine warfare, or ASW.
They aren't the same thing at all.
Not even close.
Yeah.
They are entirely different ball games with vastly different hardware and software requirements. Surface surveillance is essentially looking down at the water. You're detecting visible ships, tracking activities on the surface.
Right.
A radar, electro-optical sensors, and extra fuel are phenomenal for that mission.
Yeah.
They extend the ship's line of sight well beyond the horizon.
Which is standard Coast Guard jurisdiction, like search and rescue, tracking illegal fishing fleets, enforcing sovereignty claims.
Exactly that. But hunting a nuclear-powered submarine that is actively utilizing the ocean's physical properties to hide from you, that requires listening beneath the water, processing incredibly complex acoustic data.
And the helicopter doesn't have that gear.
No. The recent footage we have completely fails to show the required tools for that job. There is no visible immersion in the sonar system. We don't see sonobuoy dispensers, and we don't see lightweight torpedo pylons.
So it can't actually shoot a sub, even if it magically stumbled over one.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And beyond just lacking weapons, the hardware means nothing without the processing capability. Anti-submarine warfare is not just about dropping a microphone into the water.
Right, it's way more complicated than that.
It requires acoustic processing algorithms that can filter out, snapping shrimp, seismic activity, and surface shipping noise just to isolate the very specific 60 hertz hum of a nuclear reactor coolant pump on a submarine.
Wow.
It requires highly trained acoustic crews and tactical data exchange networks. Without that entire ecosystem, this helicopter is a surveillance platform, not a submarine hunter.
Okay, so If the helicopter doesn't actually have the acoustic sub-hunting gear yet, if it's essentially just a highly capable lookout tower for a giant Coast Guard ship, why is Washington paying such close attention to this? Why are defense analysts scrutinizing a white helicopter?
Whoa.
It seems like it comes down to the geography and timing of where this piece is moving on the geostrategic chessboard.
What's fascinating here is how directly this tracks with the evolution of U.S. naval posture. If you look at the Pacific theater today, American attack submarines are arguably the single most potent asymmetric advantage Washington possesses.
Oh, for sure.
And they are a massive concern for Chinese military planners.
Because they operate in a completely different domain where surface superiority doesn't necessarily help you.
Exactly. In any potential conflict scenario involving Taiwan or the broader Western Pacific, American submarines have the capability to independently disrupt amphibious operations, cut vital maritime supply lines, and just generally deny sea control.
They're stealthy.
Highly durable, incredibly lethal, and profoundly difficult to track. Washington knows this and has been overtly leaning into that subsurface advantage.
Wait, I want to play devil's advocate for a second here. If we look at the timeline of the latest info, Washington is putting brand new submarine squadrons in Australia and pushing highly lethal Virginia-class subs to Guam.
Yeah, that's true.
So couldn't Beijing argue that the U.S. is the one actively escalating the underwater threat? Why wouldn't China put military-grade helicopters on their Coast Guard ships as a logical defensive response to that U.S. buildup?
That is precisely the argument Beijing strategists would make. And it highlights the action-reaction cycle driving the security dilemma in the Indo-Pacific right now. The timeline of U.S. movements is highly deliberate.
Right.
In November 2024, U.S. Virginia-class submarines began regular forward deployments to Guam. Guam is geographically critical because it serves as the tip of the spear. It significantly shortens the transit time to potential operating areas within the first island chain.
That strategic bottleneck of islands running from Japan down through Taiwan and the Philippines.
Yes, exactly.
And then you have the southern anchor being established.
Yes. In June 2026, a new American submarine squadron was established at HMAS Sterling in Australia, which is a direct manifestation of the AUK SPAC.
Right, I remember that.
This reinforces a continuous rotating presence and deepens subsurface warfare cooperation with a key ally, effectively boxing in the strategic maritime space from both the east and the south.
So Washington is moving its most lethal, stealthy chess pieces right up to the edge of the board.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about this specific white Z-20 helicopter on a Chinese Coast Guard ship if it doesn't even have torpedoes?
Well,
it basically comes down to the physics of what naval strategists call the search challenge. Finding a submarine isn't just looking for a needle in a haystack. It's looking for a needle in a massive, three-dimensional acoustic maze.
yeah, because the ocean is not a uniform body of water. Submarine commanders actively utilize thermoclines, which are these layers of water with vastly different temperatures and pressures to hide.
Wow. Okay.
These thermoclines actually bend and refract sound waves, creating acoustic shadow zones where a submarine can operate completely undetected by surface sonar.
That's incredible.
It is. It's an incredibly resource-intensive environment to search.
Which is why this Z-20 matters. It's like realizing your neighbor didn't just install a camera on their porch, but they wired it to a centralized, neighborhood-wide security database. Even if the camera itself can't arrest you, the network makes the whole neighborhood hostile territory for a burglar.
That's a great way to put it.
If this specific Z-20 is doing surface surveillance, it radically expands China's overall maritime awareness network.
It transforms the tactical arithmetic. Because if the Coast Guard is handling the vast majority of surface surveillance, like tracking surface contacts, monitoring electronic emissions, that frees up the PLA Navy's fully equipped sub-hunting helicopters for dedicated acoustic search missions.
Right, it's a division of labor.
Exactly. The Coast Guard becomes a critical node in a much larger integrated interference denial system.
So they are working together to basically cast a much wider, denser net.
Furthermore, every additional sensor platform forces an American submarine commander to factor it into their threat matrix. If you are operating a submarine and trying to remain undetected, you have to assume that Coast Guard helicopters' search radar can spot your periscope if you raise it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You have to assume it can intercept your communications mast. Even without acoustic gear, it can relay your general position to a nearby naval destroyer that actually does have the towed sonar arrays to hunt you down.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We know the U.S. is forward deploying its subs, and we know China's surveillance network is expanding geographically. But the true geostrategic power of this new Z-20 deployment isn't just in the surface radar it carries.
It's in what we don't know.
Exactly. It's the ambiguity.
Yeah?
Just to think of it like a very high-stakes strategic poker game. Beijing has deliberately not confirmed the aircraft's internal mission equipment. They haven't confirmed its potential weaponry, its readiness timeline, or even how it integrates with the PLA Navy.
Right.
By simply parking a modified Navy-style Z-20 on a massive ship in the South China Sea, Beijing forces the U.S. and its allies to plan for a worst-case ASW scenario without China ever actually having to show its hand.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the weaponization of this ambiguity has a profound dual impact on the region. First, consider the impact on Washington and its allies. As you noted, submarine operations require extreme operational security.
Yeah, you have to be paranoid.
You must plan for the worst-case scenario. If that white helicopter might have an acoustic dipping sonar modularly installed tomorrow, you are forced to treat it like a lethal sub-hunter today.
Wow.
Over the long run, this signals a slow, steady shrinking of the freedom of underwater operations. The operational ocean gets a little bit smaller, a little bit more restrictive every time an ambiguous platform like this is deployed.
Because you can never be 100% sure the gun isn't loaded, so you just have to act like it is.
Exactly. And the second, perhaps more immediate impact is on China's regional neighbor nations in Southeast Asia that have overlapping territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea.
Right. This plays perfectly into gray zone tactics.
The gray zone is that murky operational space between routine diplomatic statecraft and open armed conflict. Historically, we've seen nations use civilian or law enforcement vessels to achieve military aims.
Like the Cod Wars, right?
Yes, the Cod Wars between the UK and Iceland during the Cold War being a classic example, where Iceland aggressively used Coast Guard vessels to secure economic zones against British naval trawlers. China has essentially perfected this model.
It's a huge flex.
For regional governments, seeing a military-grade aviation asset deployed on a Coast Guard vessel is a massive intimidation tactic.
So they are essentially exploiting a legal and diplomatic loophole. By painting the ship white and calling it a Coast Guard cutter, they completely paralyze the diplomatic response of neighboring countries.
That is the strategic brilliance of the move.
Mm-hmm.
These neighboring nations possess much smaller Coast Guard vessels. They operate with shorter flight ranges and heavily limited sensor suites.
Right.
China maintains the strict narrative of civilian law enforcement, which makes it politically disastrous for a neighboring country, or even the U.S., to respond by deploying a gray-hulled military Navy ship.
Because doing so would immediately paint them as the military aggressor, escalating a civilian law enforcement dispute.
Exactly. It is a brilliantly frustrating tactic for defense planners.
Yeah, you have a 165-meter ship, which is literally dubbed the giant ship, carrying a highly sophisticated long-range helicopter. And because it's painted white and falls under the Ministry of Public Security rather than the military, you can't officially treat it like a warship.
Even though it is actively mapping the maritime battlefield for the actual warships waiting just over the horizon.
Yeah, it's wild.
And that is the crux of why this development warrants such intense geostrategic focus. The verifiable, concrete conclusion we can draw from the latest updates is limited but highly significant.
Which is?
The Chinese Coast Guard is now actively operating high-capability naval-style helicopters. The surveillance reach has undeniably expanded. The dedicated submarine hunter function is still awaiting final, hard evidence like satellite imagery of torpedoes being loaded or official confirmation of acoustic training programs.
Right.
But in the gray zone, the potential of a capability is often utilized just as effectively as the capability itself.
Because it's all about making the adversary second-guess their next move and calculate risks they previously just didn't have to consider.
Exactly.
Well, wrapping up this short, precise deep dive into the geostrategic implications, we've seen how a few modifications to an airframe, moving some tail wheels, and adding a radome can ripple outward, impacting everything from regional diplomacy in the South China Sea to the deployment strategies of nuclear submarines out of Australia and Guam.
I think there's one final strategic thought we should leave the listener to mull over, building on this evolution of the gray zone.
Let's hear it.
If China is successfully blurring the line between a civilian Coast Guard and a military Navy, if they are essentially forcing adversaries to treat white-painted law enforcement ships as potential high-end sub-hunters and intelligence nodes, how long until neighboring nations are forced to militarize their own Coast Guards in response?
Oh, wow.
And if everyone's Coast Guard in the Indo-Pacific is suddenly armed with military-grade sensors and aviation assets, do we even have a genuine civilian maritime space left in the region?
Yeah. I mean, if every neighborhood watch suddenly starts driving armored personnel carriers, it's not really a neighborhood watch anymore, is it? That is a brilliantly chilling point to end on, and something that will definitely shape the maritime security environment in the years to come. Thank you, everyone, for watching or listening to this analysis. We love unpacking these complex global moves with you. Be sure to check out our other podcasts for more geostrategic deep dives. Until next time, stay curious and keep your eyes on the horizon. See you next time.